And we're going live. Let me admit all the participants. And we're going live. Let me admit all the participants. Hello everyone and welcome to the second and last webinar for our IFMSA Social Accountability Week. I hope that you really enjoyed what is coming to national team prepared this week. So if you saw yesterday's webinar, we discussed the concept of social accountability in general and also its importance to the future of healthcare. Webinar for our IFMSA Social Accountability Week. I hope that you really enjoyed what is coming to national team prepared this week. So today we're going to look at one example of what does a socially accountable medical education look like. Today I really have the pleasure to have with me Dr. Tomlin Paul, who's the Dean of the University of the West Indies, who won this year's Aspire to Excellence Award for Social Accountability at the AMI 2020 virtual conference. And on the other side, I also have the pleasure to have with me Mr. Nikolai, who's a fervent medical educator. He's a passionate student leader of the university, as well as the SCOMI Regional Assistant for Americas for this term. So there are many words that we can use to describe this university. Like we're going to see it today. It's a university that made the impossible possible. And they started back in 1944 with only 33 students to having now more than 4,000 undergraduate students from seven different programs. So I really hope that you are going to enjoy this webinar as much as I do, but I will stop at this point as I think it will be better to hear from the person who would know the best about this university. I would like you all to welcome Dr. Tomlin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ali, for that introduction. And good morning to everyone. Well, it's morning here in Jamaica. So I greet you warmly from the island of Jamaica in the Caribbean. I want to welcome and thank you for the invitation. Thanks very much from to the IFMSA for the honor of being able to share with the IFMSA body and with students a little bit about our university and our work here in the Caribbean. I acknowledge the presence of some of my colleagues and our members of the JAMSA, Mr. Omar Edwards, our Jamaica Medical Students Association president is here, and Ms. Sienna Lunan, our vice president. I'm sure Tony and Mondel, our social accountability student leader, is here. And of course, with me, I really am happy to have Dr. Nikolai Nunes, who has been leading a top student leader in our faculty. So it's good to have the Jamaican team and the Caribbean team joining in with our colleagues here at IFMSA. We do have members from the Caribbean other than Jamaica here too. Trinidad and Tobago, SCOMI is also here. So thank you very much for the invitation. I am going to try and share my screen to share a little bit of what I have to present. So let me get that, and I think. All right, so I'll get a little organized here. There we go. All right, so this is a picture of our basic medical sciences building on the campus in Jamaica. We have a very green campus here, and the medical school has many different parts. This is only one part we're showing you here, which was the most recent construction for the Faculty of Medical Sciences Research and Basic Sciences facility. I want to make the first point too that Jamaica is one of the many campuses of the university. The University of the West Indies is, you may want to call it a federal university in that it spans the region. We have campuses in Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Antigua. We have an open campus covering many of the smaller territories, and Belize is there. And so, you know, when we speak of UE, we say UE, University of the West Indies, UWI, we're speaking about a regional enterprise spanning this archipelago of islands. And I hope many of you who are here would have either visited or would have a chance to visit us in the Caribbean. Our Vice Chancellor, Sir Hilary Beckles, would be very delighted to have this, you know, our global connections. Now, Ali and team at IFMSA has given me a challenging, given us a challenging question to look at and to deliberate. The question thrown out in this first part of the discussion, what does a socially accountable medical school look like? And I think it's a very nice question to deliberate, because everyone in here this morning should be asking that question of their school. Is my school looking like it's socially accountable? And we just this year, we were very delighted to have received the Aspire Award for Excellence in Social Accountability from the Association of Medical Education of Europe. And the award, I want to say, first of all, we are very humbled by this award, but it is not a marker, in my view, that we have arrived. I do not see this kind of award as one that says, hey, you are it, and this is it. Really, what I think this award signals is that we have a commitment and we have a process, and we are pushing forward and continuously, you know, pushing forward to that finish line, if there's ever such a finish line for social accountability. And I start the discussion by putting three things on the table. I think when you ask yourself, are you socially accountable? And I've been, as dean of this medical school, I've been going through these three things. The thinking, you think about what you're doing, think about our response to society. The feeling, what do you feel? Is there a passion? Is there a drive to say, we want our school to be doing something along this line, something different? And the acting, the action. Yesterday, we had a very nice presentation. I was in the audience listening to Dr. Charles Bolin, really the father of this whole vision and mission of social accountability, and Dr. Bjorg. And Bolin and Heck talk about a socially accountable medical school is one that has an obligation and lives up to that obligation to respond to the priority health needs of the region or the country it serves. And so within that definition of social accountability is the concept of obligation. When I think about it, is that, and that's where I suppose the thinking and the feeling. Does your school feel that it has a duty to do something to respond to what's happening around it? Has it been thinking about this? Does it feel that this is something we must do? And then having done all of that, are we acting? Because you can be, sometimes we are in the thinking stage for a long time, we're in the feeling stage, and we don't move to action. And I think the first sort of essence I'm throwing out when we say, what does a socially accountable school look like? We're saying, do we think and feel in our schools that we have a sense of obligation to respond? And do we follow that up with action? And I think if you're doing those things, then you are pretty much on the road to social accountability. So a little bit about our school. We have 7 health professions that we train. So we don't only train physicians, we are training, as you see, dentists, nurses, pharmacists, physical therapists. And that has given me a wonderful opportunity to promote interprofessionalism. When I started as dean 4 years ago, just a little under 4 years ago, I felt that one of the missions that I would undertake is to continue the marriage, the intermarriage of all these disciplines. Maybe the school that you're at has a similar kind of model. And I believe it's very, very important in the training that we bring all the groups together as much as possible. So at the point of exit, already the physician is recognizing that the work is within a team setting. Now that's a part of my social accountability vision also, because it speaks to relevance and in that think, feel, act duty that we have. When we go out, we're going to be responding in a particular way, the way what's the professional identity of the physician? How does a physician see himself or herself? Is it the person in charge who has all the answers, or is it someone who can work in this setting? So we're in Jamaica, and our medical school has a base in Kingston. Everybody would have maybe know that's the capital of Jamaica. Jamaica has just about 3 million persons, but we get students from all over the Caribbean coming into our medical school for training. So we have students from Trinidad and Barbados and the other territories. And really what we do is we have, although we are based as an administrative center in Kingston, we have students getting an exposure throughout rural Jamaica, other suburban sites across the country. So we do our best to have a distributed model as much as possible throughout the Jamaican country. Now, as you heard Ali had said, we're 72 years old. We're the first undergraduate program in the region to get accreditation from the accrediting body. And we have 1,400 medical students, and we have many other students contributing to the pool to bring up our full cohort of students. The stated mission of the school, and this is something that we have worked on, is to advance learning, create knowledge, foster innovation in health, the positive transformation of the Caribbean. I think one of the enablers, we're going to look at what are the things that helps us to move in the direction of social accountability, and what are the things that will pull us back. I feel that one of the important things is from the governance side, we must have a vision and a mission for this. So we have put in our core values for the medical school and for the faculty, social accountability. In the same way we have integrity, excellence, gender justice, etc., as core values, social accountability is there as something that drives the way we feel and think. When we come every day, we want to think about this response. So that's tied up in our vision and mission. And the content of curriculum is always, we always think about that quite a bit. And you want to have a curriculum in your medical school that is supportive of an orientation to service and an orientation to community. And so however we do it, there are many different models and shapes, there's longitudinal programs, etc. But we have long had this vision going back from way back in the 60s and onwards. Our school has always been looking at getting students out in the community. Students spend blocks of time giving service, working with the national health system, and the government support that kind of orientation. So that is an enabling factor also, by having curriculum orientation in that direction and the partnership and support for such. Leadership is also an important enabler. So when I started in 2017, I had this thinking, well, what would my deanship be about? In addition to the regular administrative work day to day, what are the things that I care about that I would like to portray and have the faculty feel and move with and move in that direction? And I placed social accountability and interprofessional education as priorities. We started a rural outreach program, which pushed our students to go out, students from all disciplines to go out and give service. They would do this as much as it was not formalized in the curriculum. We wanted to get it going. So we would do this on a Saturday, on a weekend. We would take busloads of students out to deliver care in rural communities. And I set up formally a social accountability and interprofessional working group to manage and develop the program, the whole program for social accountability. Promoting student engagement and supporting student ideas and initiative. So now I want to get to the core of what I see as critical enablement, a critical enabler, and that is student leadership. The experience I've had here in Jamaica is that you cannot move your school to social accountability status or interest without student engagement. So I was very fortunate to come in as dean at a time when what I saw was a lot of interest from students knocking on my door, looking to be involved, looking to be more involved. And I was very open at the same time to hearing the voice of the students and to look at what they had brought to the table. So this student movement, which was also taking on social accountability, led by Dr. Nunes. Nikolai was a medical student then 4 years ago, established the first interprofessional student leadership council within the faculty and united student leadership in the other health professions around social accountability and interprofessionalism. So the point is here that the dean or the faculty, teachers, and academics cannot do this alone. I actually think, I'll be quite frank, I would say, I think if social accountability in your medical school is going to be driven only by the faculty or by the dean, it's not going to go very far. It would look like something is happening, but it will not really take ground and take seed. So recruiting a student leader champion was something that's important. And here, this is Dr. Nunes, who is going to be speaking also shortly. A leader with the Medical Students Association, a driver of the SCOMI, and he had a team with him working, and I felt very, very much supported at this. And I think it's important to show and lift the students up in your faculty. And this is maybe if I was talking to other deans and administrators, this would be my words. But students, the voice of the student is very important. We have, these are some of our student leaders. This is Nikolai. To his right is Tonian Mondel. Tonian has taken over from Nikolai now as our principal student leader for social accountability and student engagement. This is Omar, who I know is in the audience, our president for JAMSA. JAMSA is, you know, short for Jamaica Medical Students Association, and Sienna, our vice president. Very active, very, very competent student leaders. We have meetings, we sit and talk, we brainstorm, hear of their views, their ideas, their vision. This is my colleague, Dr. De Bruyn here, who is also key support for the whole mission and vision for social accountability. And here again, more pictures. Nidhi is also a driver in SCOMI. A lot of happy looking faces. Here is our team. Anton, who is now a physician who was serving before. So we have to also grow the student leadership. So it won't be sustainable if Nikolai leaves and then nothing happens because he was the only student involved. That cannot work. What we have here is a vibrant student leadership organization. And it's not the dean that's driving the student leadership, it's the students driving the student leadership. So it really is a critical part. Here are our students, physical therapy students, medical students doing outreach in the community at one of the health centers. And here is our students having raised funds to support the development of a hospital, a rural hospital, to get some infrastructure going. And this was when they handed over to the community. So student leadership is an important, I think I would almost say, Ali and others, is perhaps the most important enabler because it's the belly and the engine that drives the process. Stakeholder support, and there are many stakeholders here in Jamaica. The government has been supportive of our medical education program. And I make a connection here between, a year ago, we had the government jumping in and putting additional funding to support our medical training. But they put money particularly into supporting students from less advantaged situations. So students from inner city and from poor rural communities were given government support to attend medical school. And just at that time, I had opened the door for Nikolai to speak at our faculty admissions council and to give a talk on social accountability and admissions policy. I could do it, I did, and I supported, but I also felt let us have the voice of a student come to the council and speak about what is this social accountability vision and mission, because you're also trying to bring faculty on board, and many faculty would be saying, what is this the dean is talking about? I keep hearing social accountability. I'm not sure what it is. this is something that's important also in the process. We have to explain the vision, we have to sell it, we have to bring others on board, and we do it in a team way. So this was just to note that we had a presentation from Nikolai on this. Soon after that year, the government gave funds to support admission of a stream of students who were coming from rural Jamaica, lower income, but who matriculated and who were able to join. Another enabler is incentives. And I've tried in my time to put forward awards and recognition of social accountable initiatives. Now, I bet you that your school, even if it does not have a social accountability mission or statement or an Aspire award, which is fine. I mean, has done quite a bit in the past in terms of a socially accountable mission. If you look back at the things your schools have been involved in, you'll find that yes, we have done something. We have done a few things. And Charles Bolin spoke about this yesterday. I believe very much we need to be always embracing the fullness of the performance of the school. It's not just in this moment that we're saying we're doing things. The history and the legacy of your school, you need to bring out as much as possible. So this was an award that I gave to the Tropical Metabolism Research Unit, which is a unit in our school, which many years ago, back in the 60s, was working on severe malnutrition in Jamaica. So that was a period when we had severe protein energy malnutrition, and we had lots of babies with kwashiorkor, marasmus coming. And then about 2 years ago, we had a special ward for babies with kwashiorkor malnutrition. And 2 years ago, we closed that ward. We shut it down. Not because we ran out of funds or money, but we closed it because we no longer were seeing severe protein energy malnutrition. And when I interrogated the whole process, what it really amounted to, the work of that unit in conjunction with the government, with the ministry, with health workers in the community, and the educational partnership, we were able to bring changes and policy changes, of course, with food and food security. We were able to impact this problem. That is an example of a socially accountable initiative where the research that was going on in the school and all the development was tailored to addressing this significant health problem that Jamaica was seeing. And so much so that after a decade or two, we now saw a point where we have made headway over this, that we can close that ward. So I used it as an opportunity to say to the guys, come together. This didn't happen under my time. It was happening long before, but we recognize this time, in this moment, the impact of the school on this priority health problem. And that recognition, I believe, is important as an enabler, as an incentive. So this is an award for social accountability. One of the first 3 awards that our school gave to faculty members for socially accountable initiatives. What it does, it makes people stop and think, well, I heard about this award. What is it really? And what is this social accountability? So you get the buzz, you get the chat, and you get a chance to say more about what really is happening and how others can join on the bandwagon. So this has been a strategy also that we've used. Overall, I want to just sum up here as I come to an end in this first part, that the enablers center around a number of things. Enablers to move your school to social accountability. I see enablers can be quickly converted to barriers if we don't nurture them. You have a wonderful plant on your veranda in your house. You don't water it. 1 minute it's blossoming and it's beautiful. Water, it's going to die. So enablers can be seen. There's a flip side to each. Governance is important. The faculty mission and vision and putting that out, the structures in place to support having that unit, that body, the committee is putting that in place. Curriculum adjustments, it may mean small shifts. We did the outreach. We are pushing for more interprofessional training, and some curriculum does not always change rapidly, we know, but we can keep nudging and pushing and getting the review and get the students involved with that. Students, the equity issues of admission, Bringing students to the table and having the voice of the student, I think, is a critical part of the process. Partnership, increase the network, both internal and external, with key stakeholders. Now, there is an interesting thing, because if we only remain in the medical school and talk about social accountability, it won't work well. Really, in the broad public sector model of social accountability, there is a need for external agencies to be lobbying the school to say, are you living up to your obligation? Are you living up to this duty? Sometimes, we say, we are not always inclined to respond to our obligations ourselves. We do need sometimes others who are going to benefit from that obligation to knock on our door and say, are you doing it? And I think one of the things your schools need to do is to be looking at the role of civil society and other stakeholders, external, as lobby groups to keep the school on track. That's an important part in the partnership. Leadership, we spoke about that, student leadership, faculty leadership, and then your culture, just shifting the culture. So this is where the awards, bringing awards to the table, bringing some vibes, some positive vibes about this thing. Sometimes you don't even call it social accountability, but you shape it up in a way that people will feel excited and interesting about it. So as I end, I want to say thanks, and I think gratitude is part of the culture, and also bringing things up. I would sum up all of this by saying, is your school socially accountable? I spoke about thinking, feeling, acting. When we put that into the crucible, our students are our best assets for social accountability. I put some names, and I probably get in trouble because I can't list all my 1,400 students. I'd love to put all the names, but certainly we have had student leaders, Nikolai, Anton, Tonya, and Omar, Nidhi, Sienna, et al., the group. Our students are our best assets, and we must support and drive student leadership. Our colleagues with similar vision, Maria, Mike, Mayan, Marvin, a lot of M's, but these are colleagues, et al., who have joined me as dean and joined the movement for social accountability and promote the passion. It's good for me. I've been happy to have both students and colleagues help me to keep thinking and rethinking and thinking. It's a process, shaping the thoughts about social accountability. That engagement and discourse is very important. Government partners, of course, other stakeholders, and civil society partners must come to the table to keep this alive. So like I said to Ali before the webinar, it's not about an ideal school. It's about an engine. It's about a process. It's about cranking that engine up and getting it alive and keep gassing it so that it will keep generating the vision, keeping the vision alive and generating products as we go forward. So I will stop here. Thank you very much, Ali and colleagues, students, for listening. I will stop at this part for the first session. Back to you, Mr.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tomlin, for this first part. I really loved how, all the pictures that you shared in your first presentation showed how vibrant youth participation was in your faculty. That's something that is really important, even to being considered socially accountable. So, do we have any question for this first part? It will be great if you can now reflect on your local and national context and actually ask us questions, for example, on how youth can be meaningfully involved in the leadership of the faculty. We are really waiting for your questions. Well, I do not see any question from the chat, so I will just ask a question from my own. While working toward promoting student leadership in the faculty, were there any barriers that you faced, and how did you manage to overcome them? Be it from the student side, so for Nikolai and also for Dr. Tomlin.
It's a good question, Ali, and my reflection on the issue of developing student leadership. one of the things I felt is that many students were shy of engaging faculty and shy of engaging senior faculty. So there were a few occasions when a student would, in a conversation I would have with a student, where they would say, well, something like, I didn't know I could have come and chat with the dean, or I felt, I wasn't too sure if we would be able to have this conversation or this meeting. And it really centers around maybe culture and expectation and openness of faculty. So one of the barriers really is within the wider faculty itself, because there are pockets of culture where the engagement relationship between faculty and student is not as warm or as open, and students may perceive then that it is not so easy to reach out to faculty. Now, I've tried to shift that by my own sort of approach or attitude to students. But that in a way is a barrier in a collective sense for the organization. And so what I've had to do is to also lobby my faculty in my faculty board meetings and my one-on-one with faculty to, as much as possible, encourage them to shift their own way of seeing students and their own way of thinking about students. I think the barrier is sometimes in the head, in the mind, where if we think of a student as someone who is here to learn medicine and get the degree, but not someone who is here to bring ideas to the table, then that's a barrier. So there's a cultural thing about the organization, but there's also a mental way of how we look at the role and value of students in the organization. So that really, for me, it would be one thing. I don't know if Nikolai would say anything. Nikolai is actually, Ali, going to speak to about student engagement in a meaningful way in a while.
No, I agree with you, Dean, in terms of, I think a major challenge the students have would be how receptive and how cooperative is faculty or administration or the dean to the student body, to the student leadership, in terms of taking their ideas on board, working with them. As you said, there's not much progress in social accountability without engaging the students, whether the leadership and the body overall, completely in the mission and the vision. And here I have to acknowledge that for our school, it was particularly very easy because you had an open door policy on student engagement, and you still have an open door policy on student engagement and leadership in terms of partnering with the administration in furthering the social accountability mission. But I have to acknowledge that that's not something that occurs in every medical school. And certainly there are the medical schools in other regions that have difficulties in doing so, where their faculty and administration tends to treat students in more of a tokenistic way or more manipulative way on the Fletcher's ladder of student engagement. And so that is a massive barrier. And therein lies the real challenge of how do you overcome that. There's multiple ways in which to approach the situation. But I would say for the student leadership, they would have to keep chipping away slowly at that barrier. I don't think you can expect some of those barriers to fall immediately, but I think with sustained time and pressure, right, you will win the battle or the war in the long run, for lack of a better analogy, in terms of breaking down those barriers bit by bit. You have to have realistic expectations based on your school's culture and region and how things are done. Certainly as a student leader, I would say that we didn't, as student leaders, always get what we wanted when we came to the table. But I think one of the reasons why it worked really well is because we realized as student leaders that we needed to be partners in the process and not really adversaries in the process. And I think that was a model that really worked for us.
Thank you very much for your answers. I received some more questions in the chat. The first one is anonymous, and I think it's for Dr. Tomlin. How do we tackle student apathy towards understanding social accountability, especially regarding implementing projects?
Student apathy towards social accountability. Uh, yeah, I think some of this would have to come into the context of, maybe I would say, a little bit of marketing. And in this webinar this morning, we're using the word social accountability quite a bit. It's like, it sounds formal and like something, and I know people say, well, what is that? But the way I look at it is to sit back and reflect on where your students are, where my students are, what's their needs and interests. And in a way, everything that is active within the body of the school can be leveraged towards social accountability. So we don't always have to be calling it a social accountability sort of mission or vision. When we do outreach and we take students out to the rural Jamaica to work for a day of giving service, giving care, there's a lot of incentives in that. One is just getting out on a bus with colleagues. I know some of my students have formed relationships with other students, just meeting new students in the school. It's a big school, so getting out there, there's a kind of social vibes to that. There's drinks and food available. There's a chance for the student to practice, to service. So it's service and it's service learning. And out of that sort of experience, you come back and you reflect on the vision and the mission, and attitudes shift and change. So addressing the apathy is also, for social accountability, is also connected to the overall energy of the medical school. I think, I come back, it sounds like I'm saying the same thing, but student engagement in general, if a student is not feeling excited or driven about the school that they're in, for any reason, then the participation in anything is going to be low. So you also have to strive to build an open culture in general, to say, we're here for you. Let me hear what your challenges are. Let's work on this. We can't fix everything, but we're going to be available in an effort to address apathy. And then once you can get engagement along any lines, you will see that movement, that change.
And if I could jump in here and say something about addressing apathy, from the perspective of student leadership, it has to be sustainable. You have to keep driving at it. When I was national officer for medical education between 2016 to 2017, my JAMSA president at the time was actually Dr. Anton Small. Dr. Small has graduated about 2 years now, and he's still actively involved in the medical school as a young alumni driver, as a young alumni mentor for the students. And what's important is that since I was national officer nearly 3 years ago, we've had 2 other national officers since. Every national officer and every SCOME generation that's come after me has done better than my team did initially. And that is because every year they graduate, our graduates come back and put time and energy into building the SCOME and building the JAMSA. So it's not that we just graduate and we leave. We're still engaged with the school. We're still helping mentor the student leaders that are currently in the school as students. And it's kind of a domino effect in a sense. As the chips fall, more of them continue to fall down the line. And that, I think, has helped boost our student engagement. We still have pockets of apathy in the school. I think that's every school. But if you look at where we were 5 years ago to where we are today, right, it's partially because we've got these younger alumni that that are graduating and coming out, but they're still putting time and energy into helping the current students. I think that's been a major point, and that's something the dean has taken on board in terms of embracing this younger alumni. We have it's called the Young Alumni Group, and that has helped, I would say, help JAMSA. I'm on the supervisory council of JAMSA still, having graduated. So I think those are some of the things as students and young alumni that we've done to boost our engagement level and decrease the apathy in the school.
Great. Let me just sum up both of your answers regarding this question. To actually overcome apathy in medical students regarding working on social accountability, two different aspects were discussed here: the importance of creating a culture for like engaging medical students, and creating a legacy and having a sustainable leadership, people that are going to come back to like give what they got from the federation, from the leadership there. And that's how you can promote, like you can have a positive feedback on how the whole leadership is growing inside the faculty. I see many questions, but I think we will have to move to the next segment. And all the questions that we're asking right now in the chat will be tackled later in the webinar. Thank you very much.
So now I think Ali, we'd have Nikolai, you'd have your section on the looking at the role of medical students, which we've sort of started discussing, but I'll pass over to you, Nikolai, for your presentation.
Right, and I think I started talking about that just now. So you can look at it from two perspectives, I think. One being a very academic perspective, using Fletcher's ladder of student engagement to guide where your engagement level is and where you want it to be. And if you remember Fletcher's ladder, it has 8 rungs on the ladder, the first 3 being degrees of non-participation, which involve manipulation, tokenism, which are things that decoration, which are things that you don't want, because that really discourages the students if they're just being used as window dressing. And as opposed to the 5 rungs of engagement where you're heading more participation, where you're heading more to the top, where there's student, faculty, parity, and equity, which is where you want to be. So that's the more academic perspective, alongside the work of people like Harm Peters in like 12 tips for student engagement, which is a paper in Medical Teacher, and a workshop he gives every year in AME, which is actually pretty great. That, when I went to my first AME in 2018, really helped in terms of adjusting our student engagement style at my medical school back then. So there's that academic perspective, and I would recommend all medical students to go and look at that at Harm Peters' paper on 12 tips for student engagement, as well as looking at Fletcher's ladder on student engagement to help guide them from an academic perspective. And then there's the more non-academic way, and that allows you to use your creativity in finding a system that works for you. When I was the student leader, I realized we really needed to have a little bit more structure in the school. So I started designing councils and leadership bodies that would bring all the student leaders together under one roof, not just in the medical school, but in the other health profession schools of our Faculty of Medical Sciences, to help be that driving force, that sounding board, to create change in terms of building student engagement. Because the best way was really to get everybody to the same table, get everybody talking, get everybody's creative juices flowing, and even the socializing aspect of it was pretty important. So we started that, but what was also helpful in that is that we would have these meetings, but we would also invite faculty to these meetings from time to time. We wouldn't just meet by ourselves. So we would actually invite the dean, we'd invite deputy deans and heads of department to these meetings, and we'd all sit down around the table very casually, everybody operating at the same level, trying to say, these are some of the problems we're having. How do we get to fix it? and just everybody's voice was heard and heard respectfully. And that was really helpful, because when we saw that the faculty was willing to sit down and engage with us at our level, and that we were partners in the process, that helped motivate us to work harder in terms of solving the problems. And when students would see that, and this is the role of trying to communicate to your students what's going on in the student leadership of the school. Everybody's familiar with social media. We would put our pictures up on the meetings up on our social media platforms, and we would write reports about what happened in the meeting and disseminate it to the students. So that was something that we found worked well in terms of lifting the engagement level in the school. And I think the students now today would say that they feel way more comfortable sitting at the table in partnership with the administration, the dean, and the faculty than probably students did 10 years ago. So it's about changing the leadership culture and the engagement culture and style. And I really think that's something that did it for us. There's a question about in terms of students and community-based medical education and research. What we really focused on was more the outreach aspect of it, because social accountability spans teaching, research, and service and outreach. So we thought as a student body, where we could leverage the most engagement was not necessarily the teaching or the research, but more in the outreach. And the dean and the administration gave us a lot of flexibility to engage the communities directly, which is a big part of social accountability in the partnership pentagram, where you put the community at the center, their needs at the center of what you're doing. So we were able to engage the community. When we had community leaders come to our school to set up our outreach help fairs, we as student leaders were actually invited to those meetings. So we sat faculty and students to help plan out what we would do and how we would do it when we would do it. And that gave us a sense of ownership. It wasn't just the school telling us, hey, you need to go to this community and do this on this weekend. But we were able to say, we think that we can do something here or we can do something there. And that sort of collaboration was pretty important to us as well.
Thank you very much, Nikolai, for giving us some insight of your perspective regarding the role of medical students in implementing social accountability, and like how they can be more engaged, and also the different steps that you undergo to actually be able to contribute to the execution of this in your curriculum. Would you like to reflect on what Nikolai said, Dr. Tomlin?
Yes, thanks, Ali. I think his points are very well made. In terms of student engagement, one of the things that, in fact, I said Nikolai taught me was Fletcher's Ladder, and it's a wonderful tool and model to reflect on where students are in terms of operating in your school. And, moving from tokenism, and it has really, Nikolai and I have talked about this, it has made me think sometimes we administrators in the school, we may be guilty of treating students' views and inputs in a tokenistic way. And and then we say, okay, yes, I hear you. We did meet with the students. And then we say to somebody else, well, our students are very much involved. They're very much doing stuff, but we are just listening or barely listening at times. And I think that reflection on Fletcher's Ladder has been very important for me in my development as a dean, in how I relate to students and what I want to promote. He made a point about the meetings we had, where the suggestions that were made, we would be open. And as he said, not everything would work all the time, but we were open to listening and opening the door for the student engagement. I think building that confidence was important, and allowing them to to say, why don't we? Maybe we could. Yes, you know, all of that is important. So I pretty much concur with his views, his perspectives, but it's, you know, it's always good to hear when you work with students, you may not always hear the whole story as a dean or as an administrator. And you have to sometimes triangulate and talk to as many students and get the feedback across the board to understand how students feel. I think there are times when it's very difficult from the faculty side to get something that the students would like to see change. And communication becomes critical there because you lose trust if the communication is not there. And at times, we are not always communicating as well as we should. I'm aware of that. And we need to always be thinking and working and getting the whole organization moving in that direction, because not everything can be shifted or moved. It might be a good idea by the students, but if we cannot get a student to understand why right now, because of all kinds of administrative blocks, then that's a challenge also in terms of communication. So those are my reflections, Ali.
Great, thank you very much. I think from this point we can move on to the next block for this webinar. And as we discussed uh, how medical students were engaged in the university, in your university, we are going now to discuss about the assessment of social accountability, another important topic to know about. Like, we know what is social accountability, we know what makes a faculty socially accountable, but like, how can we know how accountable a social medical school is? Dr. Tomlin, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. All right, let me move to, so assessing social accountability. Very important topic again, because we are asking, as you say, Ali, what is this about? But you know, how do we know we're there? How do we know even what it is? And I think the assessment, we got to think of the scope of this initiative, its context, and of course there's tools and indicators. And I'm not going to say a whole lot about tools and indicators so much. We will have a touch on that. Nikolai will join me in that. But I want to go back to the work of Dr. Bolin, Charles Bolin et al., where they have produced, this is what is called a social obligation scale. And this is, I find, a useful reference point, and we can complement and add to this. But looking at assessing your school and assessing social accountability, remember I said in that early definition, social accountability refers to the obligation of the school to respond to the priority health needs of the community or the country that it serves. And that obligation word is what we are sort of expanding here. So we're really saying that along the path, along the way to bringing social accountability to the table are levels of obligation. So let's look at this first here. We say social needs identified, and there are a number of indicators here that you would want to look at. You want to look at the objectives of the school, the educational programs. And what I find sometimes when we assess social accountability, we think a lot about the programs. But this picture here is making the point that it goes beyond just what is your program like, what are you teaching, and community training and service learning. And so it goes beyond the program and curriculum to have these other issues: quality of graduates, focus on evaluation, and assessors. So a school can be along the obligation scale, along the spectrum, anywhere from being socially responsible to socially responsive and accountable. And it is, I remember I started this morning by talking about think, feel, act. It's kind of like that we're talking about also, where we are at different points along the spectrum. So, and I want, let me highlight one or two areas just to make some examples. we often take, let's look at quality of graduates as an example. My school, and I'm sure your school also, will often say, we are a good medical school. We produce good doctors. You hear that a lot. We produce good doctors, and I can give you an example of Dr. X who graduated and is now doing this and that and that. Good practitioners, great. Now, what does that really mean, of course, is open to a whole question. What is a good in quotes, doctor look like? You know, Charles Bolin had the 5-star doctor award program for Wonka some time back, and that Wonka movement talks about characteristics of the ideal sort of family physician, which involve leadership, community orientation, and so on. But if we go from the social responsibility level to social responsiveness, we say, well, the quality of your graduate meeting criteria of professionalism is important. The professional response, how they treat patients, the integrity, and so on. And the last, under social accountability, your graduate, you're trying to produce a graduate who can become a health system change agent. And that can happen in many different ways. We're not saying that everyone has to be in government, in policy, and so on, but being able to advocate, having a voice. A physician who might be a very busy surgeon in the operating room or in the emergency room, for instance, who is seeing lots of cases of a particular problem, whether it's violence, abuse of women, you know, issues coming up, and doing a good job in the emergency room can also have a voice to advocate for change and partner with civil society to do stuff. So it's an attitude as much as it is action also. But this one, I think, is an interesting one for us to start with. What are our medical schools producing? Are we producing good doctors, which is awesome? Or are we also investing in producing agents who can make a difference in terms of changing, looking at social determinants and impacting in a broader way? The programs, of course, as I said, sometimes your program is community oriented. It has an orientation to the community, or it might be based in the community, something deeper, as opposed to being contextualized. And when we say contextualized now, we're saying like we have a partnership with the community to the point where the needs of the community become part of the curriculum. Sometimes we develop the curriculum and we say, well, the curriculum is going to be addressing this and we will impact somewhere. But where your curriculum is intensely connected to the needs of the community is where you've begun to contextualize your training into the heart and soul of what's happening in the community out there. You know, some argue that the best dean of the medical school ideally should be the chief medical officer, maybe, because there should be that marriage. The country's national health system should be so closely integrated. Maybe that's ideal, and it doesn't have to go that route for us to achieve the objective. But I'm trying to make the point here of the closeness of the educational program. Maybe the last one I'll give here is second to last, focus on evaluation. So when you're assessing the whole process and when you're evaluating how good is my school, how well is my school doing, you can evaluate the process and look at the numbers of students trained. So my annual report of my faculty says we graduated 250 medical students this year. X% got honors degree and distinction and so on. And similar with outcomes, this is what was done and this is what we achieved. But deeper than that, social accountability begs the question to say, so what? People can be kind of cynical sometimes, say, well, yes, you graduated all those students. So what? What difference has it made in the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years? It's not belittling the efforts. We're not putting down the work. The numbers are good and important, but we are pushing ourselves in the assessment to think more deeply about that question of impact. What difference is your school making in the community? Very important question, I think, that needs to be asked. When you come to assessing, at the end of the day, if you're getting into the accountability model, you have to bring to the table health partners, civil society, you need to bring everybody to the table and ask those persons, are you getting anything from our medical school? Civil society, government agencies, community groups. What impact do you think we're making? What do you need from us is important in this last in assessment here. So I think this is a wonderful frame for thinking about assessing. It is not, doesn't answer all the questions, but I think it's an important first base as members of IFMSA for us to think about where we are on this obligation scale. Are we socially responsible schools? Is my school socially responsible? Which is good. Or is it one step further along the scale to being socially responsive? And you can look at these points. Or is it socially accountable in terms of these specifics here? So I throw this out and leave this with you. It's a nice reference that's available out there for discussion and deliberation. You can have it in your groups. Very quickly, we have developed, I was a member of this team working with the Pan American Health Organization to develop a tool called the ISAT, the Indicators of Social Accountability tool, to evaluate programs in schools with respect to social accountability. It has 5 areas that it asks questions for, and each area has a number of specific indicators. So this is where now we drill down into the metrics and the specifics, and we would look at things like, what is the admission policy for the school? Does the school have an admission policy for students that caters to disadvantaged rural students, etc.? How do you recruit faculty, and what kind of faculty are you looking for in your school? Because again, as we saw earlier, the faculty leadership and orientation affects social accountability. The educational program is always there, the specifics of the program. The research, how is research oriented? Is it research, do you have adequate proportion of your research oriented to community issues, addressing the needs of disadvantage and social determinants, and so on. And of course, governance. So this is a tool that it's really now becoming into its own in terms of us using it. There are other tools out there. I'm going to, it has been validated by a number of agencies, but I would stop here and ask my colleague Nikolai to say something about there's a toolkit that is also being promoted from the student side, which I think might be very practical for us to use. So Nikolai, I'll pass over to you at this point.
Right, thanks, Dean Paul. I think what was really helpful, and this might be a plug because this is IFMSA, but the IFMSA toolkit on social accountability for me, when I was a student leader in charge, was where I started, and I thought that that toolkit was an excellent framework to evaluate, as a starting basis, to evaluate social accountability in your school, because it was really very comprehensive and very open in terms of, simple in terms of what sort of metrics it was looking at in terms of you ranking your school. And I believe, Ali, you correct me if it's wrong, it's now been translated into several languages besides English, which means that it's more widely available for our IFMSA members. And I think it's, as I said, it's a really good starting point because it tells you very gently where you are and where you could possibly have to go in terms of ranking your school social accountability. And it opens up that opportunity for you to do it as an exercise with your student body. That's something at our school we've not yet done. We've done it at the level of some of our student leaders, but even though Dean Paul has looked at the ISAT and other measures, objective measures such as the Amy Aspire Awards, we think it's beneficial to use the toolkit on the entire student population of the school and hear from the students and what do the students think objectively. It's a good objective measure that students will be able to appreciate because it was designed by students for students. And I think that's a really good starting point for us as medical students in terms of assessing your school social accountability in terms of where you are and where you might possibly want to go. And then after you finish, you can build on that with things like the ISAT, working in partnership with your faculty or administration. So I think that's what I would really want to contribute in terms of this area.
Great, thank you very much, Nikolai. I can only second what you said regarding the toolkit, as also from my personal experience as a national officer, one of the first steps I actually had when I started getting interested into social accountability was introducing and presenting the toolkit to my local officers. And among them, one from the faculty of Marrakesh actually used the toolkit to review, to evaluate the social accountability of their faculty, and they developed a report on their social accountability, and also and also they defined some areas where the faculty can actually better work on their social accountability. Like for all the audience that we have there, if you're not aware of the toolkit that we have, it's a toolkit that IFMSA developed back in 2017 that has everything that you need to know to actually get started into the topic. You can find the toolkit directly in IFMSA website. You can also find it into the Scummy public folder. And we can also share it later after the webinar. Great. And we are going to move also to the next segment. I would invite Dr. Tomlin to take the floor.
Thanks. Thanks, Ali. So the next section looks at accreditation, social accountability. I won't put up any slides. I just want to talk a little bit about this. When we think of accreditation, it does spark a little bit of anxiety sometimes, because we all want to go to medical schools that are accredited and that have a active, positive accreditation status. The accreditation really, in essence, it's a voluntary process. We must remember that schools agree to be accredited and open their doors. There are, though, regulations in some countries where the governments will tie the operation of the school to having accreditation status. And so it can become difficult for some schools to continue their operations if they're not accredited, because of that regulatory framework that the national health system or educational system will bring to bear. But it's in essence, the school opens itself up to this process that is testing its quality. So it's about quality. And we tend to think of quality, I don't know, maybe when I asked a question to the audience, when I said, what is the quality of your medical education like? And what do you look for when you speak of quality? And many times we think of outcomes related to some things. We say, well, we graduate 1,000 students every year, or 500 students, and they all get good GPAs. We say, well, the GPA, your grade point average, an indicator, the number of honors or distinction, and so on. So we tend to think of quality in terms of that. We tend to think of, we can go into quality indicators also to look at how are you delivering the education. So your accreditation standards that you're judged by, often many of the accreditation standards are process standards. They're saying, well, what does your curriculum look like? How do you do it? How many physicians do you have per student? Where do the students go for their training, etc.? And there's a lot of detailed process indicators that we can use. I'm putting all of that first out to say that when we think of accreditation and social accountability, maybe we should ask the question, why should we think of having social accountability on the accreditation radar? Well, we can exist and maybe continue, our school will continue to get students if we're not pushed back by the accreditation body. But given what we have said so far this morning and yesterday's webinar and today, I want to position social accountability on the accreditation matrix as being important as a novel quality indicator. A novel quality indicator that goes beyond looking at process and looks at the question of relevance. So we want to say, how relevant is your training program? And the relevance is tied to the context of making a difference in society and in community. The heart and soul of medical training should be to help others, to improve well-being, to respond to our community and make the place, you know, it sounds maybe very high to say, to make the world a better place kind of thing. Maybe it sounds dreamy, But if we focus the operation of the school in the context of making a difference, then relevance becomes an important indicator of quality. And so there is a justification for saying we should put social accountability as a standard for medical education and add it to the already established traditional quality indicators of, you know, numbers of doctors in the wards, what kind of hospitals, the curriculum, the content of the curriculum, etc. Not at this point in time, I know certainly our Canadian medical schools have been moving in that direction. The accrediting bodies rather have been putting explicit social accountability standards in the accreditation matrix, but the World Federation of Medical Education has some notion of it in there. And I think if you survey your medical school's accrediting body, you would find some things that are implicit to social accountability. You'll find some things that speak to it. But I'm very much a lobbyist for having an explicit expression of social accountability on the accreditation framework, because it speaks to what I call a novel indicator of quality, and that is relevance. The work that we do in life is important, but its relevance is even more important when we think of what difference it's going to make. You know, we get up every day and we do stuff and we want to say, what is this about? Who am I impacting? What difference is it going to make? So our school is accredited by the Caribbean Association of the Caribbean Authority for accreditation in medical, health professions education. And the requirements for social accountability accreditation, we do not have explicit standards in our accreditation body just yet. We do have embedded points and standards there, but I would expect and hope in the future we would move in the direction of framing some of these social accountability standards very much in there. And I'll make the last point by saying, go back to Bolin's and Heck's social accountability, the obligation scale that I just referred to. And as you start to look at standards that should be in the accreditation standards, we could use some of those references, some of those points in there, such as there's a question I would ask, to what extent does your school measure the impact of its training program? Does the school have a framework for measuring impact? That's a social accountability standard that is implicit. Because if you're not looking at impact, then you're very busy turning out physicians and training. If you're putting impact in there, it's going to help to push us into a socially accountable direction. And then things like social determinants in the curriculum and the application of social determinants would be important. So I would stop here, Ali, and we would maybe again open it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, I really wanted to highlight again one of the notion that came through your answer, and that is that there is definitely an intertwining relationship between quality and social accountability. Like if we look at social accountability side, one of the values of social accountability is actually quality. But like on the other side, quality should also have in its criteria to be like socially accountable. Like we cannot have a curriculum that is not socially accountable, cannot be considered as impactful, as it's not community-centered. And that's definitely an important concept to always keep in mind while we're discussing AQA on one side, social accountability on the other side, because both of them actually are just one side of the same coin. And I would like to invite you to address our final part for this webinar. And I think most of our audience will actually really look forward to this one, as it's actually relevant to the actual context of the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the questions we asked Dr. Tomlin and Dr. Nikolai to tackle in this final part is actually regarding, was socially accountability addressed in your medical curriculum during the pandemic? Was the training affected? And the final question is, how can medical schools be more socially accountable during distance study? Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. During everyone, we know we're in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I will say a little bit about where we are now, and I think Dr. Nuance would be able to speak very well because he left us, he graduated in the midst of the impact of the pandemic on our training. So like other schools that are here this morning, when the pandemic struck us, in March earlier this year in Jamaica, we suspended our clinical training in terms of hospital hands-on clinic training. And we took a break and we converted as much as we could to online remote teaching and learning. We did that for a few months. Some of that is still continuing in the tail end. But we have restarted and are about to restart in the main clinical hospital exposure with all of the precautions and support and guidance that needs to be taken during this time. I think in the question of how social accountability was addressed during this pandemic, the curriculum, we had to change the delivery of the curriculum in terms of online. We had to, based on what we said earlier, our social outreach has been affected because we have put that on hold in terms of actually getting out physically into rural Jamaica and seeing patients face to face, etc. But we had a very good opportunity to express social accountability response. The government of Jamaica, the National Health System, approached us to engage our students in the communication aspects of the pandemic response. And we opened that up to our student body. And I'm happy to say in the end, we had a good response from our students, our medical students, who ended up working. We set up a call center, and our students have worked in this call center. They worked for 6 months within the peak of the pandemic period, working with the government authorities to manage the communication response to the pandemic. I'm very proud of our students in this respect. They certainly showed good leadership. They even adjusted some of the protocols that the government had, and they were learning at the same time in the background what was going on with the pandemic in Jamaica. So we were able to make a very valid contribution to the pandemic response through the emergency communication call center that was set up that allowed our medical students to work during this period. A reflection I have about social accountability and the pandemic is that in the pre-pandemic period, when we speak about the community responding, the school responding to the community, perhaps it's less, there's less risk. We're talking about in a pandemic, people, risk of disease spreading and infectious disease. And actually going out on the ground to do things will become more challenging during the pandemic. So the social accountability response in a practical logistic sense can be impaired. However, we must not forget the broad framework. Vision, mission, governance, those things can continue and must continue. So we must continue to support the notion of a responsive, school, whether in Bolin's chart, whether it is socially responsive, socially responsible, socially accountable, the vision must be kept alive. And I think of all the things we have seen, the vision and mission has been less impaired. Governance remains. What is impaired mostly on the ground is the partnership between the society and civil society and the school in responding practically on the ground in terms of a logistic sense. I think schools, what we need to do, certainly for my school, is to become more involved in looking at the equity impact of COVID, the social determinants impact tied to what COVID is doing in our community, and being able to play a role in addressing some of the inequities that are coming out of unemployment issues, lack of income, lower income communities that are feeling the impact worse. But it has been a difficult period, and I'll close on this and then have Nikolai say some words. It's been difficult because the challenge that the school itself faced internally to keep its operations going it's taken so much energy. Just the planning and the changes and the pivoting as we get outbreaks and then government regulations are changing. We have become very, very busy with just managing day-to-day the operational response to COVID-19 in our hospitals, our residents and so who have fallen ill. And so I would admit and say our social accountability strategy has taken a bit of a blow under COVID-19. But when I sit back in my quiet moments and reflect, my thoughts are that more than ever, we need to be thinking about social accountability and the response of the school at this time. So I think we're very, it's a transition period. The pandemic is a very interesting stress test for social accountability, just like a stress test we would do for the heart. I think the pandemic is a stress test for the concept and the notion of social accountability that we need to bear in mind. I'll pause and pass on to my colleague, Dr. Nunes, for his perspectives.
Thank you, Dean. In terms of the curriculum, I think one of the things that jumps out at me was that the concept of telemedicine not being in many medical schools' curricula, which ties into how can medical schools be more socially accountable during distance learning. I think COVID-19 and work from home really pushed it into us as medical students and professionals that how important telemedicine, not just as a future application, but a current application, of now, in terms of us being able to get back into the community and continue to live up to our social accountable obligations. And in our experience at our medical school, where I was actually at that process, graduating out of school, when the partnership with the government of Jamaica and the University of the West Indies to have the medical students in the call centers come on board. And again, you look at the question of student engagement. Again, it was a joint team of faculty and student leaders coming together. And in fact, a lot of the day-to-day operations on the ground in the call center were actually led by student leadership. The students and student leadership worked hand in hand with the government to develop further protocols that moved the response from just strictly communication into having to evolve a bit naturally into elements of telemedicine at points in the response. And again, not seen very often in the curriculum, but I think has to be a major curricular shift for medical schools around the world in the future. We can't produce graduates anymore who don't have a solid foundation in telemedicine. So I think that's something that COVID-19 has impacted significantly. And working in partnership with the faculty to create that curriculum change would allow us to enhance, get back to where we were, and strengthen and expand our outreach into rural Jamaica or rural settings and underprivileged settings, and all settings in general, if you're going to have a situation where there's going to be an essential situation where you have to stay at home more than ever, we know that part of what happened in this pandemic is that chronic diseases, patients with chronic diseases have suffered tremendously, because with the fact that we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic means less chronic disease clinics, less personal, I guess, wanting to come to the hospital or the health setting in the middle of a pandemic to address your chronic non-communicable disease. And in a lot of low middle income countries, especially, where chronic diseases, and even more developed countries where chronic diseases are such a huge health burden and require a very family medicine approach to continuously regulate the control of your chronic disease. If you have a situation where your patients aren't coming into the clinics because you don't have the capacity at this time, because you pulled capacity away from these particular chronic diseases to deal with an infectious disease, or just that patients are rightfully concerned about their levels of risk and exposure, that has impacts that ripple through the health system and affect social accountability. The other question I want to throw out there is the question of risk and exposure of medical students. There's one argument that says, hey, this is what we signed up for. A pandemic is just another day at the office as medical students. We're expected to go out there and do our jobs in the same way. And, we, as medical students, we've seen the memes. Unfortunately, we know that in the early days of the pandemics, where the health systems became very overwhelmed quickly in the UK, in France, in Spain, medical students were graduated early to join the health workforce to be able to assist in taking care of patients with COVID-19 and patients who didn't have COVID-19. And so there's that argument. Where do we draw the line for medical students? How much is too much risk? How much is too much exposure? And again, it speaks to a bit of a curriculum shift and how to enhance your curriculum. Simple things like how to don and doff your PPE. Not necessarily should you wait until you've graduated. I think medical students, medical school curricula should, in their infectious disease modules, teach the basics of infectious disease prevention and control, IPC. That includes donning and doffing PPE. So I think in many ways, this pandemic has affected us as medical students, and not just our ability to be socially accountable, but our ability to integrate effectively into the health system.
Great, thank you very much, Nikolai, Dr. Nikolai. Thank you very much, Dr. Tomlin, for your answers regarding the situation and how it was tackled by your university. At this point, I would like to look at the chat and see if we have any question. Like, we went through all the different segments that we have prepared for today's webinar, and I would like to pick the question that we had previously in the first part and we didn't really answer. So one of the first question is from Michel Stockler, and he was wondering in the first segment, as we discussed, what was implemented in your faculty to reward like socially accountable action of the school. He was wondering if there were any financial prizes that were delivered to like uh, project managers, and how was the mentoring and support program for the engaged students in like the social accountability were organized?
Thanks, Jim. No, we did not have any financial incentives or payments for program managers. People were all of this really were voluntary sign up and engagement. The incentives I gave were, you saw a picture of the little plaque, the little sort of gift, but that was there was no money attached to it. The mentoring of students question, how were students mentored? Very much, I would say, from where I sat, it was experiential process. The partnership and engagement, the meetings that Dr. Nguyen spoke about, the many meetings we've had, and being present and available. There was also, I would say, a mentoring that was fueled by the leadership in SCOME and JAMSA, based on their links with IFMSA also. And this is my sense of it. Again, Nikolai can speak to this, but when Nikolai and the team had the IFMSA meetings and the visits and the conferences, I would always get feedback on it, but I would also see Nikolai and the team engaging other students and sharing and encouraging students to say, IFMSA has this running, you should take part in it. The tough conferences, the Towards Unity for Health meetings. So a lot of the mentoring was experiential as opposed to a very formal, structured mentoring process. I would like to hear Nikolai's views on that, if he thinks I'm going off or if this is appropriate.
No, that's really where we were at. I personally, when I took over as national officer about 5 years ago, JAMSA was not as close to IFMSA as we are today. Certainly, we were an NMO of IFMSA, but I believe when I started, we hadn't had a student go to a General Assembly for maybe 2 years, and it had been we were only getting situations where we would get like one student going every couple of years. And when I got my first opportunity to attend my first General Assembly, I was in my 4th year, and that was our August meeting in Montreal. That and starting to attend those conferences was what really helped me develop my medical education chops, so to speak, and then bringing that knowledge back and transferring it to our student leaders, and then getting more student leaders involved to the point where by the time we reached Slovenia 2019 March meeting, we had a team of 4 of us go. And every year it's building in the numbers. So there's that informal mentorship. But I have to personally credit IFMSA as an organization. I wouldn't be here today without IFMSA. I think IFMSA, through General Assemblies, through capacity building, through campaigns, they impacted me and Dr. Small as national officer and president, respectively. And over the last couple of years, you've seen our successors, Omar, Sienna, and others, really reaping the benefits of us bringing IFMSA back to JAMSA Jamaica and strengthening the ties between NMO and IFMSA. I think if I had to credit the 2 major credit people or organizations I would credit for our success as a school would be yourself as dean and the policies you've brought, and IFMSA as the organization that's helped us tremendously in terms of our capacity building and our ability to build ourselves as a medical students association, and then work with your administration in the school to help develop the school in terms of medical education, curriculum, social accountability, quality. So those would be, I would say, the 2 biggest impacts. So I'm literally standing here today as a product of saying, this is what IFMSA can do for medical students and your medical school.
Great, thank you very much. And I can only second what you said regarding IFMSA, because also from my side, as a national officer, I couldn't have accomplished anything from what I did in my NMO without the capacity building from IFMSA. So I would like to thank again IFMSA as a federation to always provide opportunities for medical students or healthcare students around the world to actually get the competencies and the knowledge necessary to make a change in their country, be it relevant to medical education or any other field of interest. We also have another interesting question from Yasser, and that question is regarding social accountability itself as a concept. Should it be also a part of the curriculum? Like, should we teach medical students what social accountability is, for example, in their courses?
Thanks. Thanks, Ali. So the question is, should we teach medical students social accountability? Nice question, and very, again, provocative reflection. And I would answer it by saying that if we take a think, feel, act approach, which is what I started with, that we certainly should be promoting students to think about their role, both during the time they're students and when they graduate, to feel driven, to have a sense of duty. This is what did we sign up for? A sense of duty, and to act. I very much see social accountability. On one hand, I can see it as a curriculum with content, and some of the content, of course, would be things like social determinants, etc. But I do feel quite more strongly that it is, to some extent, it's less about curriculum content as much as it is about transforming that purpose and sense of duty that a graduate may have, and a feeling of being able to respond to their society. And so the question really is, Ali, how do we teach that? I think following upon the question of should we teach it? And I would say, yes, we should teach it, but very quickly, let's be careful if we do not want to think of the teaching in the formal pedagogical sense of curriculum content, etc. But we want to really embrace a philosophy. We want to bring students in from day one into a place where they say, this place I'm being trained in is connected to something and has a purpose. And so I am going to come into this school with a purpose also. So it's how do we teach social accountability? And maybe I'll change the question a little further to say, how do we nurture the professional identity of the student over a 5-year period to one that is embracing a sense of obligation? And that, I think, a lot of it is coming back to, I'll sum up by saying, mentoring, culture, leadership, excitement. Our students like to be involved, active, buzz. I've seen those pictures I showed you of my student leaders. They are passionate and buzzy. Tonya and Sienna, Nikolai, the energy, Nidhi, doing stuff. That's what we want to create in the teaching, quote unquote, process of social accountability. So that's how I would shape it, as opposed to putting it in the curriculum. It's not so much putting it in the curriculum. Yes, but it has all the hidden curriculum. It has to be there. The broader context of curriculum must take it on.
Thank you very much. Like, I really do enjoy how you reshaped the question to actually talk about shaping professional identity, and it's totally relevant. And I think that's what the person in the audience expected from this answer. Like, how can we actually build the capacity, shape our medical students to actually care about the community and care about their patients at the same time too. So there are still many questions in the chat, but I think it will be great to just conclude on this great question and this even more amazing answer. I would like to thank again Dr. Tomlin for accepting our invitation for this webinar. And I would also like to thank Dr. Nikolai as a student leader for joining us today, and also for everything that he accomplished in both JAMSA and in his faculty. Thank you again, dear audience, for watching this webinar either in Zoom or in YouTube. And if you have any question or any inquiry, feel free to reach out to either Nikolai or me through our professional emails, and we will be sure to answer all your inquiry regarding this amazing topic. Thank you again, and see you really soon with another webinar. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Ali.